Michael Carter dropped the wrench so hard it cracked the concrete and he ran. He didn't grab his coat. He didn't lock his own door. He just ran toward the screaming a little girl's voice, thin and terrified, coming from the house next door where nobody was supposed to live. He kicked the gate open, shouldered through the front door, and stopped cold. Water was pouring across the kitchen floor like a river, and standing in the middle of it, soaked to the knees, was a chubby little girl with tears running down her cheeks. She looked up at him and whispered 5 words that would break his heart. "Our bed is broken too." What that little girl said next, and what Michael found in that cold, empty house, is the reason grown men all across America have written to say, this story made them cry. Before we begin, do me one small favor: comment the name of the city you're watching from, so I can see how far this story travels tonight. And if you still believe one good man can change a stranger's whole life, subscribe and stay with me all the way to the end. You won't want to miss what happens. The rain had been coming down since 4 in the morning, and Michael Carter had been under that truck since 5. 57 years old and still flat on his back on a wet driveway, one arm buried up to the elbow in a transmission that had no business still running. That was the truth of his life now, and he'd made his peace with it mostly. A man could make peace with almost anything if he had a reason to get up in the morning. Michael had a reason. She was 8 years old, and she was asleep inside with her socks on, because the furnace only worked when it felt like it. "Come on," he muttered to the truck. "Come on, you old devil, not today." The truck didn't answer. Trucks never did. But Michael talked to it anyway, the way his own father used to talk to the tractor, low and patient, like coaxing a stubborn horse. His father had been a mechanic in a town that didn't exist on maps anymore. His father had died with grease under his fingernails and $40 in the bank, and everybody at the funeral had said the same thing: "Best man I ever knew." Michael used to think that was a small kind of thing to be remembered for. He didn't think that anymore. He tightened the last bolt, slid out from under the truck, and sat up in the rain. His knees popped. His back had opinions. He wiped his hands on a rag that was more grease than cloth and looked up at the gray sky like it owed him money. "You could give me one clear morning," he said to it. "Just one." The sky gave him more rain. That was when he heard it. At first he thought it was the gutter. The house next door had been empty for 8 months, foreclosed, then bought by some investor out of Columbus, then empty again. A cold house. A dead house. Michael had gotten used to the quiet of it, the dark windows, the for sale sign that had rusted at the hinges. Nobody lived there. Nobody had lived there for so long that the grass had gone wild, and the porch light had burned out, and nobody bothered to change it. So when he heard water, real water running, water, gushing water, coming from a house that was supposed to be empty, the first thing Michael felt wasn't curiosity. It was that old cop instinct feeling in the back of the neck. The one that says something is wrong. Then he heard the scream. It was a child, high and thin, and scared, the kind of scream a kid makes when they don't understand what's happening, and there's no adult telling them it's going to be okay. Michael was on his feet before he'd decided to be. The wrench hit the concrete and cracked it, and he didn't even hear it. He ran. He didn't run like a 57-year-old man. He ran like a father. The gate was latched. He didn't bother with the latch. He put his shoulder into it, and the wood gave, and he was across the dead grass in 4 strides. Up the sagging porch steps, and the front door was unlocked. The front door was open, actually hanging a few inches ajar. And he pushed through it, into a house that hit him with cold like walking into a meat locker. "Hello." His voice came out harder than he meant. "Hey, is somebody—" And then he saw her. The little girl was standing in the middle of the kitchen in a puddle that had spread all the way to the doorway, soaking the bottom of her pajama pants, her sneakers, her socks. She had round cheeks and messy brown hair and glasses that were too big for her face, fogged up from crying. She couldn't have been more than 7. And she was standing there frozen, staring at the sink, where water was arcing up out of the cabinet in a fat silver rope, spraying the ceiling, running down the walls, everywhere. She turned and saw him and screamed again and stumbled back and slipped. Michael caught her before she hit the floor. just scooped one arm around her and set her back on her feet, gentle as setting down a bag of eggs. Whoa, whoa, easy, easy now. He crouched down to her level water soaking through the knees of his jeans. I'm not gonna hurt you. My name's Michael. I live right next door, okay? Right over there. You hear that water? She nodded, hiccuping. I'm gonna make it stop. I promise you. But I need you to do something for me. Can you do something for me? She nodded again, tears still coming. I need you to stand right over there by the door where it's dry, and I need you to be brave for about 30 seconds. Can you be brave for 30 seconds? The little girl looked at him with those big fogged-up glasses, and she wiped her nose with the back of her hand, and she said in the smallest voice, I already broke it. I didn't mean to. You didn't break anything, sweetheart. I turned the handle and it went boom. That's not you breaking it. That's the pipe being old and tired just like me. Go on, over by the door. She went. Michael got down on the wet floor and yanked open the cabinet under the sink, and the water hit him full in the face. He didn't flinch. His hands already knew what to do. 30 years of maintenance work had put the knowledge in his fingers so deep, his brain didn't need to be involved. He reached past the spray, found the shutoff valve on the supply line, and cranked it. It was corroded half shut, and it fought him. He put his whole shoulder into it, teeth gritted, and it gave one turn, two turns, and the silver rope of water sputtered, coughed, and died. Silence. Just the drip, drip, drip off the ceiling, and the little girl's shaky breathing, and Michael's own heart pounding harder than a man his age liked to admit. There we go, he breathed. He sat back on the wet floor, soaked head to foot, and looked over at her. See 30 seconds. You were real brave. And the little girl, this soggy, round-faced kid in fogged-up glasses, burst into tears all over again. That was when the woman came running down the stairs. Lily, Lily, what, oh my God! She stopped dead at the bottom of the stairs and took in the whole scene. The flooded kitchen, the water dripping from the ceiling, and a big soaking wet stranger sitting on her floor next to her crying daughter. Her hand went to her mouth. She was maybe mid-30s, pale dark circles under her eyes, like she hadn't slept right in a long time, wearing a sweater with a hole in the elbow. Pretty in a worn-out way. The way a photograph looks when it's been carried in a wallet too long. And her face when she saw Michael wasn't grateful. It was afraid. Get away from her. She crossed the kitchen, fast splashing, and pulled the little girl behind her. Who are you? What are you doing in my house? Ma'am? How did you get in here? Ma'am, the door was open and I heard, you need to leave, right now. Her voice was climbing. Lily, go upstairs. Go. Mama, no. He stopped the water. Mama. Michael raised both hands, slow, staying right where he was on the floor. He knew better than to stand up. A soaking wet stranger 6'1" coming to his feet in your kitchen, that's not how you calm a scared woman down. So he stayed down there on the wet linoleum, hands up, and made his voice as soft as he owned. I'm your neighbor, he said. Michael Carter. I live in the yellow house right next door. You can see it out that window right there. I heard your girl screaming and I heard water and I thought somebody was hurt. That's all. I'm real sorry I came busting in. I'd have knocked, but... He tilted his head at the flooded floor. Didn't seem like knocking was gonna cut it. The woman didn't move, but her eyes flicked to the window and to the water and to her daughter's face, and something in her stance came down half an inch. Mama, the little girl Lily said, tugging at her sweater. He said the pipe was old and tired like him. He wasn't mean. He made the water stop. The woman looked down at her daughter, then back at Michael. Her jaw was still tight, but her eyes were doing that thing eyes do when a person is exhausted past the point of being able to fight anymore. You stopped it, she said. Not a question. Shut the supply valve. It was about to go anyway. Corroded straight through. Michael nodded at the open cabinet. You had a slow leak building up under there for a while, I'd guess. Water damage in the wood, see the black. Then the pressure found the weak spot and let go all at once. Wasn't anything your girl did. This house has been sitting empty and cold for the better part of a year. Pipes don't like being ignored. He paused. Not much does. She stared at him a long moment. "You can go now," she said quietly. "Thank you. We're fine." But Michael had been fixing broken things his whole life, and he'd learned a long time ago that the words "we're fine" were the biggest lie people told. He'd said them himself at his wife's funeral to every single person who'd hugged him. "I'm fine. We're fine. We'll be okay." He knew that lie in his bones. He could hear it in another person from across a room. He didn't move for the door. Instead, he looked around, not to be nosy, just the way a repairman's eye moves across a room and catalogs it, and what he saw made his chest go tight. There was almost nothing in the house. No couch, no table, a single folding chair by the window. 2 suitcases against the wall, still half-packed like they hadn't decided whether they were staying. A cardboard box marked Lily. Books. A lamp on the floor with no shade. The kitchen had 1 pot, 1 pan, and a stack of paper plates. There was a child's drawing taped to the refrigerator, a house, a sun, 2 stick figures holding hands. And that was the only thing on any wall in the whole place. It wasn't a home that had been robbed. It was a home that had never gotten to become one. Michael got slowly to his feet. His knees complained. He didn't step toward them. He stepped back, giving them room, and he reached for the rag hanging out of his back pocket and wiped his hands mostly so he'd have something to do with them. "Look," he said, "I don't want to overstay. But that valve I shut, it's holding, but it's holding by a thread. Next time somebody turns that faucet, it could let go again worse. Could flood you out for real. And you've got no water at that sink at all right now, which with a little one in the house." He glanced at Lily. "That's no way to spend a Tuesday. I've got parts in my garage, not fancy, but I can have you a working sink in an hour, and it won't cost you a dime. Materials are just sitting on my shelf. I can pay you," the woman said quickly. "I didn't say that so you'd pay me. I don't take charity." Michael almost smiled at that. He knew the exact shape of that pride because it was his own. He'd rather have gone hungry than take a handout. He had gone hungry more than once, so Emma wouldn't have to. "It's not charity," he said. "It's a neighbor with a full toolbox and a slow morning. That's a different thing. Around here we don't let each other flood." He nodded toward the door. "I'll grab my stuff. You don't have to let me back in, but I'd feel a lot better knowing that Valve's got something behind it before I go back to bed." He turned to leave. "Wait!" Her voice stopped him. When he looked back, she had one hand on her daughter's shoulder, and the fight had finally gone out of her face, replaced by something raw. "Claire," she said. "My name's Claire. Bennett." "Claire?" He nodded like they'd been introduced at church instead of standing ankle-deep in a flood. "Give me 10 minutes." He was back in 8. He worked on the sink for the better part of an hour, and for a long stretch of it, nobody said a word. That suited Michael fine. He was a man who did his best talking with his hands. He cut out the corroded section of pipe sweated in a new coupling, replaced the supply line and the shutoff valve both. And while he was down there, he tightened up 2 other things that were about to give without anybody asking him to. That was just how he was made. You don't leave a job half done and call it done. His father had taught him that. If you can see it, you fix it. Don't wait for it to become somebody's emergency. Claire stood in the doorway the whole time, arms crossed, watching him, like she was still deciding whether to trust him. Lily, on the other hand, had decided about Michael inside of 5 minutes. She'd dragged the one folding chair over and sat backwards on it with her chin on her hands, chubby cheeks squished up, watching him work with the fierce concentration of a child who has been very lonely for a very long time. "What's that thing called?" she asked. "This pipe wrench. What's that thing?" "Compression fitting." "What's that thing?" "Lily," Claire said. "Let the man work." "It's all right," Michael said, and to Lily, "This one's a coupling. It's how you join 2 pipes together, so they hold even when there's pressure trying to pull them apart. See, on their own they'd leak. But you put the right piece between them and they hold." He tightened it and gave it a little pat. Sometimes 2 things just need the right thing in the middle to keep them together. He didn't mean anything by it, But he felt Claire go still in the doorway, and when he glanced up, she'd looked away. "You got a whole workshop over there?" Lily asked. "Little bit of one. Garage mostly. Do you fix everything?" Michael thought about that. "Just about everything that's got parts," he said. "Sinks, faucets, doors, cars, fences, furnaces if they're feeling cooperative." He wiped his brow with his forearm. "Some things don't have parts, though. Those are harder." "Like what?" He almost said it. "Like a broken heart. Like the 8 months after my wife died when I couldn't figure out how to get out of bed." "But you don't say that to a 7-year-old. So he said, "Like an old man's knees." And Lily laughed, a real one, snorting through her nose. And Michael felt something warm move through his chest that he hadn't felt in a while. He heard Claire exhale behind him, a small sound, almost like relief. "You always help strangers like this?" she asked. It was the first thing she'd said to him that wasn't wary. Michael thought about the question. It deserved a real answer, so he gave it one. "No," he said. "Not always." He set his wrench down. "There was a stretch there where I didn't help anybody. Wouldn't have crossed the yard for a burning building." He kept his eyes on the pipe. "I lost my wife 3 years back, Rachel. And after that I sort of closed up, like a house with the shutters nailed over the windows. I told myself I was just tired, but the truth is, I couldn't stand to look at anybody who still had what I'd lost." He tightened the last fitting. "Took me a long time to figure out that the way back out of a hole like that isn't somebody reaching down to pull you up. It's you reaching over to help somebody else. That's the only ladder that works. I learned that the hard way." He didn't look up while he said it. When he finally did, Claire was staring at him with an expression he couldn't read, surprised maybe that a man in dirty jeans with grease on his hands would say a thing like that out loud. "So no," he finished. "I don't always help strangers, but I heard a kid screaming, and I've got a kid of my own. Some things you don't get to think about. You just move." For a moment, the only sound was the drip of the last water leaving the pipes. "You have a daughter?" Claire asked. "Emma. She's 8. Sleeping off a cold right now, or she'd have followed me over here to supervise, same as this one." He nodded at Lily. "She's the reason I get up. Whole reason." He turned the water back on at the valve, slow testing, and watched the new joint. It held, dry as a bone. He nodded, satisfied, and turned the faucet on full. Clean water ran clear into the drain. No leak, no spray, nothing. "There," he said. "Good as new. Better, actually. That's better pipe than the builder put in." Claire crossed the kitchen and turned the faucet with her own hand, on and off, like she needed to feel it to believe it. When she looked up at him, her eyes were wet, and she blinked it back fast, embarrassed. "How much do I owe you?" she said. It came out flat, like she'd braced herself for the number. "I already told you nothing. Please, let me—" "Claire." He said her name gently, the way you'd calm a spooked animal. "I know you can pay me. I'm not saying you can't. I'm saying I won't take it. Not for an hour of my time and 40 cents a pipe. If it bothers you that much, you can bake something and send it over with your girl, and Emma will love you forever. But you don't owe me money. Neighbors don't." She stood there holding her wallet halfway out of her pocket, and Michael watched something come apart in her face. Not all at once, just at the seams, the way a thing does when it's been held together too tight for too long. "You don't understand," she said, and her voice cracked right down the middle. "Nobody's helped me. Not in a really long time. I moved here because I didn't know anybody. That was the whole point. Nobody here knows me. Nobody knows what happened. Nobody wants anything from me. And then this morning the water, and I couldn't reach anyone. I called 2 plumbers, and one wanted $300 just to come out, and the other one didn't answer, and Lily was crying, and I just—" She stopped, pressed the back of her hand to her mouth. "I'm sorry," she said. "You don't need to hear this. You fixed my sink. You can go." Michael didn't go. He set his toolbox down on the counter real quiet and leaned back against it, and he did the thing his own grandmother had taught him a lifetime ago. The thing that costs nothing and is worth everything. He stayed, and he listened, and he didn't fill the silence. And that was when it happened. Lily, who had climbed down off her folding chair, walked over to Michael. She stood right in front of him and looked up through those fogged-up glasses, and she tugged on the leg of his jeans until he crouched down to her level. And she cupped her hand around her mouth, and she leaned in, and she whispered the way children whisper, which is not quiet at all, loud enough for the whole room to hear, "Our bed is broken too." Michael went still. "Lily," Claire said sharply, "that's enough." But the little girl kept going in that carrying whisper, her eyes big and earnest, and completely without shame, because she was 7, and she didn't yet know that some things were supposed to stay secret. "It broke a long time ago," Lily whispered. "The leg came off, and Mama couldn't fix it, so now it's just the mattress on the floor, and we both sleep on it. But it's real small, so Mama sleeps on the edge, and one time she fell off in the night and hit her head, and she said a bad word, and then she cried, but she didn't know I was awake." Lily's whisper got even lower, even more urgent. "So can you fix our bed too? Please, so Mama doesn't fall off anymore." Nobody said anything. Michael Carter had fixed 10,000 broken things in his life. He'd crawled under floors and up into attics. He'd pulled dead animals out of vents and dead marriages out of divorce papers. He'd seen the insides of more houses than a mailman. And he had thought honestly that there was no version of broken left that could still get to him. He was wrong. He looked at this little girl in her fogged-up glasses, asking him to fix a bed so her mother would stop falling off it in the dark, and he looked up at Claire. Claire, who had gone white. Claire, whose hand was over her mouth again. Claire, who had crossed her arms, not to seem tough, but to hold herself together. And Michael Carter understood all at once and all the way down exactly what kind of house he was standing in. It wasn't empty because they'd just moved in. It was empty because they'd left everything behind. Because a person only shows up in a strange town with 2 suitcases and no furniture and no couch and a child's drawing taped to the fridge for one reason. Because they're running from something and they left in a hurry and they didn't get to take the good parts with them. Michael had seen it before. He'd nearly been it before. "Lily," Claire said, and now her voice wasn't sharp. It was shaking. "Baby, go upstairs, please. Go get your book." "But is he gonna—" "Lily?" The little girl went, slow dragging her feet, looking back over her shoulder the whole way up the stairs. And then it was just the 2 of them in the kitchen, Michael and Claire, and the silence had weight to it now, real weight, the kind that has to be set down carefully, or it breaks something. "I'm sorry," Claire said. She wasn't looking at him. She was looking at the water stain on the ceiling. She doesn't understand that you don't just say things like that to people. There's nothing to be sorry for. We're doing fine." And there it was. The lie. She heard it come out of her own mouth and she flinched. "Where I have work, I do design. I'll get the bed sorted. It's just a leg. I've been meaning to—" "Claire." She stopped. Michael straightened up. He didn't come toward her. He'd learned all morning that this was a woman you had to let come to you. He just picked his toolbox back up off the counter, and he looked at her steady, and he said the truest thing he could think of. "I don't know what happened to you," he said. "It's none of my business and I'm not asking, but I know what it looks like when somebody's been carrying a load alone for so long they forgot they're allowed to set it down." He shifted the toolbox to his other hand. "I've been carrying one too. Different load, same weight maybe." He nodded toward the stairs, toward the little girl who'd disappeared. "That kid up there just did the bravest thing I've seen anybody do all year. She asked for help, out loud, to a stranger. You know how much guts that takes. Most grown men die before they can do that. I nearly did." Claire's face crumpled. She pressed both hands over her eyes and her shoulders started to shake, and she made no sound at all, which was somehow worse than crying, the crying of someone who has taught herself not to be heard. Michael did not touch her. He would not have dreamed of it. He just stood there and let her fall apart, and he said low and even, "It's all right, you're all right. Nobody's watching but me, and I don't count." It took her a minute to get herself back. When she finally lowered her hands, her eyes were red, and her face was blotchy, and she looked 10 years younger and 100 years more tired. "You should go," she whispered. "I mean it this time. Not because you've been kind, kinder than anyone, but I can't." She wrapped her arms around herself. "I don't do this anymore. Trust people. Let people in. The last time I trusted somebody, I lost everything, my whole life. And I have Lily now. I can't afford to be wrong about a person. So please, just go before I start thinking you're one of the good ones, because I've been wrong about that before, and it nearly killed me." Michael looked at her for a long moment, and then he did something that surprised even himself. He set the toolbox back down on the counter. "Tell you what," he said. "You don't have to trust me. That's a fair thing to want, and you don't have to give it to me. But I'm not going to leave a broken bed under that little girl, and I'm not going to sleep tonight knowing she's watching her mama fall off a mattress in the dark. That's just not something I've got in me anymore since I got old." He took his cap off, ran a hand through his gray hair, put it back on. "So here's what's going to happen. I'm going to go back to my garage, and I'm going to look at what lumber I've got. And tomorrow morning, if you'll let me, just the doorway, you don't even have to let me all the way in. I'm going to bring over what I need, and I'm going to build that kid a bed that doesn't have a leg that falls off. And you don't have to trust me to do that. You just have to open the door." He picked the toolbox up one more time. "And if you decide overnight you don't want me back, you leave the door shut, and I'll never bring it up again. And I'll wave at you from my yard like this never happened. Fair?" Claire stared at him. "Why?" she said. It came out cracked. "Why would you do that? You don't even know us." And Michael Carter, 57-years-old widower, out of work, $40 poorer than the mechanic he'd buried, gave her the only answer he had. "Because somebody should have done it for me," he said. "And nobody did. And I decided a long time ago I wasn't going to be another person who could have helped and didn't." He tipped his cap. "Morning, Claire," he said. "Tell Lily the coupling's holding fine." And he walked out into the rain across the dead grass through the gate. He'd broken back toward the yellow house where his own daughter was sleeping off a cold, and he did not see Claire Bennett come to the window behind him, one hand pressed flat against the cold glass, watching him go the whole way home. He did not see her turn and look at the empty house around her. The folding chair, the paper plates, the child's drawing taped to the fridge, and he did not see her sink down into that one folding chair and cover her face, and finally, for the first time in longer than she could remember, cry the way a person cries when somebody has just been kind to them for no reason at all. And upstairs, a little girl in fogged-up glasses knelt at the top of the stairs where her mother couldn't see her, and she listened to the whole thing, and she smiled to herself in the dark. Because Lily Bennett was only 7 years old. But she had already figured out something it would take the two grown-ups downstairs a great deal longer to understand. She had figured out that the man next door was not going to leave. And she was right. The morning came and Michael Carter was awake before it did. He'd been up since 4, same as always, but this morning was different, and he knew it was different, and he was a little bit disgusted with himself for how different it felt. He stood in his garage with the light on, and a cup of coffee going cold on the workbench, and he looked at the pile of lumber he'd been saving for a project he'd never gotten around to starting, and he thought about a little girl in fogged-up glasses asking him to fix a bed so her mother would stop falling off it in the dark. And he picked up the wood. He didn't let himself think too hard about whether the door next door would be open or shut. A man could drive himself crazy that way. So he just worked. He measured and he cut, and by the time the sun came up gray over Maplewood, he had the frame of a bed laid out on his garage floor, joints cut clean, nothing store-bought about it. It was going to be a good bed, solid, the kind of thing that outlasts the people who sleep in it. He ran his hand along the headboard he'd sanded smooth and he thought, "That'll do," and then he loaded it into the back of the old truck he'd fixed the day before, and he drove it 50 feet to the house next door, and he told himself the whole way that if the door was shut, he'd just turn around. The door was open, not wide, just a few inches the way it had been the morning before, except this time it hadn't blown open on its own. This time it had been left open on purpose. And standing in the gap, still in her pajamas, with her 2 big glasses and her hair a mess, was Lily Bennett, and when she saw the truck pull up, her whole face came apart with joy. "Mama! "Mama, he came back. He came back, and he has the wood." Michael laughed. He couldn't help it. It came up out of him before he could stop it, the first real laugh he'd had in a while, and it felt strange in his chest, like using a muscle he'd forgotten he had. Claire appeared behind her daughter, and Michael braced himself because he half expected the wariness to be back on her face now that the emergency was over, and she'd had a whole night to remember all the reasons not to trust a stranger. But it wasn't. She looked like she hadn't slept much. Her eyes were still puffy. But she opened the door the rest of the way, and she stood there holding it, and she said, quiet, "You really came back." "Said I would?" "People say a lot of things. I'm aware." He killed the engine and got out. "That's exactly why I try not to." He carried the bed frame in one piece at a time, and Lily supervised every step, walking backwards in front of him with her hands out like she was directing traffic, telling him to be careful of the doorway, be careful of the stairs, be careful of the wall, be careful. Be careful. And Claire stood off to the side and watched, arms crossed, but not the way she'd crossed them the day before. Yesterday, it had been armor. Today it was just cold, because the furnace in this house was as dead as the one in his had used to be. He got the frame up the stairs and into the little bedroom, and the room stopped him for a second when he saw it. Just a mattress on the floor, exactly like Lily had said. A pillow with a race car on it. A single stuffed rabbit missing an ear. A nightlight in the shape of a star plugged into the wall, still on even in the daytime, because a little girl who'd left everything behind needed something to be afraid of the dark for her. And that was it. That was the whole room. Michael didn't say anything about it. He just set the frame down and got to work, and he let Lily hand him things, the screws and the little pieces, and he made her feel like she was building it with him, because he understood that this kid needed to feel like she'd fixed something too. And while he worked, Claire drifted in the doorway, and then into the room, and then slowly she sat down on the floor against the wall with her knees up, and she watched him build her daughter a bed. "You didn't have to make it this nice," she said after a while. "It's a kid's bed. It just had to stand up. Anything worth doing?" Michael drove a screw home. "My dad used to say if you're going to do a thing halfway, don't do it, because a half-fixed thing is more dangerous than a broke one. A broke thing everybody knows to stay off it. A half-fixed thing waits till you trust it, then it drops you." He tightened the last joint and gave the frame a shake. It didn't budge. "This one won't drop anybody." They got the mattress up onto it, and Lily climbed up and flopped down and rolled back and forth testing it, and she looked up at the two grown-ups with the most serious expression a 7-year-old can make, and pronounced her verdict, "It doesn't wiggle." "No, ma'am," Michael said. "It does not wiggle." "Mama, come feel how it doesn't wiggle." Claire got up and sat on the edge of the bed, and she pressed her hand down on the mattress, and Michael watched her feel how solid it was, how it didn't shift, how a person could sleep on the edge of it all night long and never once fall off and hit their head in the dark. And he watched her understand what he'd built and why, and her chin trembled, and she got herself under control fast, because she was a woman who'd had a lot of practice getting herself under control fast. "Thank you," she said. It came out barely above a whisper. "You're welcome." "I mean it. I don't know how to." "You don't have to know how. That's the nice thing about thank you. It's already the whole sentence." She laughed at that. Wet, surprised, but a real laugh. And Michael thought that was a good place to leave it, so he started packing up his tools, and that was when his phone rang, and it was Emma's school, and everything changed. He answered it standing in the middle of that little bedroom, and Claire watched his face go from easy to hard in about 2 seconds flat. "This is Michael Carter." A pause. "She's what?" Another pause longer, and Michael's hand came up and gripped the back of his own neck, and Claire had a daughter too, so she knew that grip. She knew exactly what that grip meant. "How high?" Pause. Okay, I'm on my way. I'm 10 minutes out. Don't just keep her comfortable. I'm coming." He hung up, and he was already moving. "I gotta go. My daughter, she had a cold. I thought it was just a cold. The nurse says she's running a fever of 103, and she's not." He stopped. His hands were shaking just slightly, and he was staring at his truck keys like he'd forgotten how they worked. "I gotta go get her." "Go." Claire said. Go, go, I've got go. And he went. He left his toolbox sitting right there in the middle of her bedroom floor, and he took the stairs two at a time, and he was gone. And Claire stood at the top of the stairs and listened to his truck peel out of the driveway, and she looked down at the toolbox he'd left behind, and something in her chest pulled tight. 103 is a scary number when it's your kid. Michael made it to the school in 8 minutes and carried Emma out to the truck wrapped in the nurse's blanket, and she was hot as a stove and floppy as a rag doll. And she kept saying, "Daddy, I don't feel good," in this small, far-off voice that put ice straight down his spine. Because that's the voice, that's the one that doesn't sound like your kid, and any parent who's heard it knows it and never forgets it. He got her home and got her into bed and got the thermometer, and it said 103.4. And he did all the things, the cool cloth, the fluids, the medicine. And the medicine wouldn't stay down. And by 2 in the afternoon, the fever had climbed to 104, and Emma had stopped making sense, mumbling about her mother, about Rachel, who'd been dead 3 years, and Michael Carter sat on the edge of his daughter's bed with his dead wife's name in his sick child's mouth, and he felt the floor of the world drop out from under him. He needed a hospital. He knew he needed a hospital. And he sat there doing the math that poor men do, the terrible arithmetic. The ER visit versus the electric bill, the ambulance versus the truck payment. And he hated himself for even doing the math while his daughter burned up in front of him. But the math didn't care whether he hated it. The math just sat there being true, and his hands were shaking, and he didn't have anybody to call because he'd spent 3 years closing the shutters on everybody who might have answered. And then someone knocked on his door. He almost didn't answer it, but it came again harder, and then a voice, "Michael, Michael, it's Claire. I saw the truck. Is she okay?" He opened the door, and Claire took one look at his face and pushed straight past him into the house. "Where is she?" "Claire, you don't have to." "Where is she, Michael?" He pointed. Claire went up the stairs, and Michael followed, and she went into Emma's room and put the back of her hand against the little girl's forehead, and then her cheek, and then her neck, fast practiced, and her face did a thing Michael didn't like. How long has she been like this? The fever's been climbing since the school called at 10. No, I mean like this mumbling, this not tracking. She had 2 fingers on Emma's wrist. "Michael, has she been able to keep the medicine down?" "No, threw it up twice. And she's not sweating." Claire pulled the blanket back. "She's 104, and she's not sweating, and she's not making sense. Michael, this isn't a cold anymore. She's dehydrated, and the fever's not breaking, and you can't break it here. She needs fluids, she needs a hospital, and she needs it now, not in an hour." "I know." His voice came out wrecked. "I know she does, I just—" And Claire looked at him, and she understood the way one broke person always understands another, exactly what the thing was that he couldn't say. She'd stood in that same spot. She knew that arithmetic too. "Get her," Claire said. "Wrap her in the blanket. I'm driving. My car's out front. It's warmer than that truck. Get her, Michael, right now, and don't you say one word to me about money. Do you understand me? Not one word. Get your daughter." He got his daughter. Claire drove like she had done it before, one hand on the wheel and one hand reaching back to keep a palm on Emma's leg the whole way, and she talked the entire time in this low, steady voice to Emma, to Michael, to nobody. Just keeping the sound going. And Michael sat in the back with his little girl's head in his lap, and he watched this woman he'd known for one single day drive his child to the hospital, and he did not have words for what was happening inside his chest. They took Emma back immediately. That's the thing about a fever that high in a kid, nobody makes you wait. And then it was the 2 of them in those plastic chairs, under those terrible lights, and the minutes went by like hours. And at some point Michael realized he'd been holding his own hand so tight, his knuckles had gone white. And at some point after that, he realized Claire's hand was on top of both of his. Just resting there, not saying anything, just there. And he didn't pull away. "She's going to be okay," Claire said quietly. "You don't know that." "No," she agreed. "I don't. But she's here now, and she's got people looking at her who know what they're doing, and an hour ago she didn't, and you got her here. You did that. Whatever happens, you didn't wait. You didn't let the fear make you wait." That matters, Michael. I've seen what happens when people wait. He looked at her. That sounds like it comes from somewhere. Claire was quiet for a moment. Then she said, My mother waited. When I was a kid, she had a lump and she waited because we didn't have insurance, and she kept saying it was nothing, we're fine, and by the time she stopped waiting, it was too late to matter. She wasn't looking at him. She was looking at the double doors Emma had gone through. So no, I don't make people wait, not when it's a kid, not when I can drive. And Michael understood then that the woman who'd been afraid to open her door to him yesterday had just broken every rule she'd made for herself, had let a strange man's crisis into her carefully sealed-off life, had put her own daughter in the care of who knows who to drive his kid to the hospital, and she'd done it without a half-second of hesitation. He understood that the walls she'd built were real, but there was a door in them after all, and the password was a sick child. Because some things you don't get to think about, you just move. She'd learned it from the same hard teacher he had. The doctor came out at 6. Emma had a bad viral infection, and she was severely dehydrated. And if they'd waited much longer, it could have gotten dangerous, but they'd caught it, and the fluids were already bringing her down. And she was going to be fine. She just needed to stay overnight, so they could keep the IV going. Michael put his face in his hands, and Claire put her arm around his shoulders, and he let her this stranger, this woman from next door. He let her hold him up in a hospital hallway, while the relief came through him so hard it hurt. She's okay, he kept saying. She's okay. She's okay. She's okay, Claire agreed. You both are. They led him back to see her. Emma was small in the big bed with the IV in her little arm, but her eyes were clear again, and she looked up at her father and said, Daddy, I threw up on the nurse. With such genuine remorse that Michael laughed so he wouldn't cry. And then Emma's eyes went past him to the woman standing in the doorway, and she said, Who's that? That's Claire, Michael said. She's our neighbor. She drove us here. Emma studied Claire with the frank, unembarrassed stare of a child. And then she said, You have kind eyes, like a mom. And Claire, standing in that doorway, made a small sound and had to look at the ceiling for a second, and Michael pretended he didn't see it. He stayed the night, of course. But it came out in the small hours in the way things come out when it's late and you're worn down past your defenses. That Claire had a problem too, which was that Lily was home with a neighbor. Claire barely knew a woman 2 doors down who'd agreed to sit for a couple hours. And it was now way past a couple hours, and Claire needed to get back, and she was torn all up about leaving. Go, Michael told her. Go home to your girl. You've done more for us today than anybody's done in 3 years. Go. I don't want to leave you here alone. I've been alone a long time. I know how to do that part. It's the other part I'm out of practice on. He reached out, and for the first time, he was the one who put his hand over hers. Go home, Claire, and thank you. Those 2 words, they don't cover it. But it's the whole sentence, right? She smiled, squeezed his hand. And she left, and Michael sat in the dark next to his sleeping daughter and thought about the fact that 24 hours ago he had not known this woman existed, and now he could not imagine the last 24 hours without her, and that scared him more than the fever had. Emma came home the next afternoon, and by the day after that she was well enough to be bored, which is the surest sign a kid is on the mend. And the first thing she wanted to do, the second she had energy, was meet Lily. Because Michael had made the mistake of mentioning that the nice lady who drove them had a daughter, and Emma had latched onto this fact with the ferocity of an 8-year-old who had spent too much time being the only kid in a quiet house. So Michael walked her next door, and he knocked, and when Claire opened it, the 2 little girls looked at each other across the threshold with the intense mutual appraisal of children deciding whether to be best friends or mortal enemies. And about 4 seconds later, Lily said, Do you want to see my new bed? It doesn't wiggle. And Emma said, Yes. And they were gone thundering up the stairs, and that was that. Michael and Claire stood in the doorway listening to the 2 of them shriek about something upstairs, and Claire said, Well, I guess that's decided. I guess it is. You want coffee? I have exactly 2 mugs and a folding chair, so one of us has to stand, but I have coffee. I'll stand, Michael said, and stepped inside. And that was the beginning of it. That was the real beginning. Because after that day, the wall between the two houses might as well not have existed. It started small the way these things do. Michael noticed the porch light next door was out, and he changed the bulb without being asked the way he'd offered to that first morning. Claire noticed Emma's shoes were coming apart at the toe, and she happened to have a glue that worked on that exact kind of rubber, and she fixed them and sent them back without a word, the way he'd sent back a sink. The two girls ran between the two houses like there wasn't a property line, and half the time Michael would come in from a job and find Lily at his kitchen table doing homework next to Emma, and half the time Claire would look up from her laptop to find Emma on her floor drawing next to Lily. And Michael started to notice that the second house was getting warmer, and it wasn't just the furnace which he'd fixed the second week without letting her pay him. It was more furniture. A real chair. A little table. A rug. Bit by bit, Claire's house was becoming a home. And Michael understood that he was watching a woman decide to stay somewhere, decide to unpack the suitcases at last. And he had the strange, quiet, terrifying thought that he might be part of the reason. He started staying for dinner sometimes, just sometimes. Claire cooked, and it turned out she was good at it, and the four of them would sit around that little table that got a little bigger every week, and the girls would talk over each other, and Michael would referee, and Claire would catch his eye across the table, and something would pass between them. Something with no name. And Michael would look away first, every time, because he was 57 years old and out of work, and his heart had been in a box in the ground next to his wife for 3 years. And he did not know how to do this. He did not know if he was allowed to do this, and the not knowing sat in his chest like a stone. And then one night, the stone got a lot heavier, because that was the night he found out who Claire Bennett actually was. It was late. The girls had fallen asleep in Lily's room in a pile the way kids do, and Michael was helping Claire clean up the kitchen, and he was reaching to put a bowl on a high shelf when he knocked a folder off the top of the refrigerator, and it fell open on the floor, and papers went everywhere, and he crouched down to gather them up, apologizing, and then he stopped because he was looking at the papers. They were legal papers, and they were about a company, Bennett and Vale Design, and they had numbers on them. Big numbers, the kind of numbers Michael Carter had never had within a country mile of his bank account, and they had Claire's name on them over and over, Claire Bennett co-founder, and Claire Bennett majority stakeholder, and then a lot of other language that Michael didn't fully understand, but understood well enough, words like transfer of control and forced buyout and litigation pending. He looked up. Claire was standing very still by the sink. "Claire," he said slowly, still crouched over the papers. "What is this?" "Michael, Bennett and Vale Design." He stood up, holding the papers, and he wasn't accusing, he was just off balance like the floor had tilted. "I've heard of this. This is a big company. This is a real company. The kind of company that does hotels. And I did maintenance for a hotel that hired a design firm, and I swear to God the name—" He stopped. "This is you. This is your company." "It was my company," Claire said. Her voice had gone flat and careful, the voice of someone bracing for the thing they'd known was coming. Past tense. Michael looked down at the papers in his hand, and then he looked around the little house, the folding chair he'd graduated out of the paper plates she'd replaced the mattress on the floor. He'd built a frame for the whole desperate poverty of it, and he could not make it fit with the numbers on the page, and something cold started to open up in his stomach. "I don't understand," he said. "These numbers, Claire, if this is real, you should be rich." She laughed, and it was an awful laugh, nothing like her real one. "Yeah, I should be. On paper, I'm worth more than you'll make in 10 lifetimes, Michael. On paper." She crossed her arms, and now it was armor again all the way back like the last 3 weeks hadn't happened. "You want to know why my daughter and I are sleeping on a mattress on the floor in a house with no furniture. You want to know why I couldn't pay a plumber $300 the day you walked into my kitchen. Because every dollar I have is frozen. Every single one. Tied up in a lawsuit I can't afford to fight against a man with 100 times my lawyers." "What man?" Claire looked at him, and Michael watched her decide whether to tell him watched the whole war of it move across her face, and then she said in a voice gone very quiet, "My ex-husband. My business partner. Same man. His name is Daniel Vale." She turned away and gripped the edge of the sink. "I built that company," she said. "Me. My designs, my clients, my nights and weekends for 8 years. Daniel handled the business side, the money, the contracts, because I trusted him, because I married him, because when you love somebody, you don't read every page of what they put in front of you, you just sign where they point. And that was the mistake. That was the whole mistake right there, signing where he pointed." Her knuckles were white on the edge of the sink. He'd been moving pieces for years. Slow, patient, setting it up so that when he was ready, he could take it all, the company, the money, the control, and leave me with nothing but my name on a lawsuit. And the day he was ready, he did it. He walked into my office with lawyers and papers, and he told me I was out of my own company. And when I said I'd fight it, he smiled at me, Michael. He smiled, and he said, "With what money I have all of it." Michael stood there holding the papers. "So I ran," Claire said. "I took Lily, and I took what I could grab, and I ran to the only place I could afford, which was a foreclosed house in a town where nobody knew my name, because I couldn't stand for one more person to look at me the way people look at a woman who lost everything. I couldn't stand the pity. I couldn't stand any of it. I just wanted to be nobody, somewhere quiet where I could figure out how to survive on nothing and raise my kid, and maybe someday claw back enough to fight him." She finally turned around and her eyes were bright and hard and wet. "And then a plumber broke down my front door because he heard my kid scream, and he wouldn't take my money, and he built her a bed, and he was kind to me, Michael, for no reason for 3 weeks. And now you're standing in my kitchen, holding the proof that I'm not who you thought I was, and I can see it on your face. I can see it. So just say it. Get it over with." "Say what?" "That this changes things, that you feel stupid, that you thought you were helping some poor, broke single mom, and it turns out she's a fraud, a rich lady playing house, Claire." Michael set the papers down on the counter gently, and he looked at her, and he felt a lot of things moving through him at once, and he sorted through them fast, because she was standing there waiting to be abandoned, and he'd be damned if he was going to be the one who taught her she'd been right to expect it. "Stop. Just stop for a second." She stopped, but she was shaking. "You want to know what I'm feeling right now?" he said. "I'll tell you exactly what I'm feeling. I'm feeling like a fool, but not for the reason you think. Michael, I'm feeling like a fool because for 3 weeks I've been walking around here feeling sorry for myself, thinking, here's this nice woman, and I got nothing to offer her. I'm broke. I'm old. I lost my job. What could a woman ever want with a man who fixes sinks for a living? 3 weeks I've been talking myself out of even letting myself think about." He stopped himself, shook his head. "And now I find out you're some kind of design genius who built a company worth millions, and you're telling me the reason you're sitting here on a folding chair is because a man you trusted robbed you blind, and the only thing I can think, Claire, the only thing in my head right now is that the man did to you exactly what I've spent 3 weeks being afraid somebody would do to me. He got you to trust him, and then he used it, and it nearly killed you. And now you can't open a door without expecting the person on the other side to do it again." Claire stared at him. "So no," Michael said. "This doesn't change things, except it changes one thing. It tells me why you looked at me like I was going to hurt you that first morning. And it makes me want more than I have wanted anything in 3 years to be the one person who proves you wrong." The kitchen was very quiet. Upstairs, one of the girls turned over in her sleep, and the old floor creaked. "You don't get it," Claire whispered. "It's not that simple. He's not Daniel isn't just some bad ex-Michael. He's not going to leave me alone. The lawsuit is still going. He still needs something from me, and as long as he needs it, he's going to keep coming, and men like him, they find things out. They find out everything. If he finds out about you, about the girls, about any of this..." She pressed her hand to her mouth. "I brought Lily here to be safe, and every day I let you in, Every day, I let this get realer. I'm putting a target on you too. On Emma. You don't want to be part of my life, Michael. My life is a wreck with a rich man attached to it who doesn't lose. And Michael Carter, who had spent 3 years being afraid of everything, who had closed the shutters and nailed them down, who had done the terrible arithmetic at his sick daughter's bedside, looked at this woman telling him to run for his own good. And he felt the fear rise up in him, real fear, and then he felt something rise up underneath it that was stronger, and he realized what it was. It was the same thing that had put him on his feet before he'd decided to stand that first morning when he heard a child scream. Some things you don't get to think about. You just move. Claire, he said, I want you to hear me, because I'm only going to say it once, and then we're going to go check on our girls, and tomorrow I'm going to fix that leak in your bathroom I've been meaning to get to. He stepped closer, and he didn't touch her, but he was close enough that she had to look up at him. I have been scared my whole life. Scared of failing. Scared of not being enough. Scared these last 3 years of ever caring about anybody again, because caring is just standing still and waiting to lose them. And you know where all that fear got me. It got me a locked-up house and a locked-up heart, and 3 years I'll never get back. So I'm done being scared. A rich man who doesn't lose, I've got nothing he can take. I've already lost the things that scared me the worst. But I'll tell you what I do have. I've got 2 hands that work, and a truck that runs, and a whole lot of nothing left to be afraid of. And if he comes around here, if he ever comes near you or those girls, he's going to find out that a man with nothing to lose is the most dangerous kind of man there is. Claire's face broke, not the way it had broken the first day, quiet and hidden. This time she just let it, and she put her hands over her face. And Michael did what he hadn't let himself do for 3 weeks. What he hadn't done with any woman since he'd buried his wife. He stepped in and he put his arms around her. Careful, the way you'd hold something that had been dropped too many times, and she came against his chest and gripped the front of his shirt in both fists and cried. And he held her, and he said nothing because thank you was the whole sentence, and so was this. And that was how they were standing, when the little girls who were not asleep, who had crept to the top of the stairs, the way little girls do, looked at each other in the dark. And Emma Carter leaned over to Lily Bennett and cupped her hand around her mouth and whispered in a whisper that was not quiet at all, I told you he liked her. And Lily whispered back, I know. I'm the one who broke the bed on purpose. Emma's eyes went huge. You did not. Did too. A little. So he'd have to come back. Lily pushed her glasses up her nose with great satisfaction. Grown-ups need help sometimes. And downstairs, unaware that they'd just been outmaneuvered by a 7-year-old, the 2 grown-ups held onto each other in a kitchen that had been ice-cold 3 weeks ago and was warm now, and for a little while neither one of them was afraid of anything at all. But 400 miles away, in a glass office on the top floor of a building with his name on it, a man named Daniel Vale was looking at a report a private investigator had just emailed him. And the report had an address on it. And the address was a small foreclosed house in a town called Maplewood, Ohio. And there was a photograph attached taken with a long lens of Claire Bennett standing on a front porch, laughing at something with a gray-haired man in work clothes beside her and 2 little girls at their feet. And Daniel Vale looked at that photograph for a long, long time. And then he picked up his phone, and he made a call, and he said 4 words that would bring the whole thing crashing down. Find out about him. The report came back in 9 days, and it was thorough because Daniel Vale did not pay for anything that wasn't. Michael Carter, 57. Widower. Wife Rachel deceased 3 years breast cancer, and there it was on the page, the medical debt that had followed her out of the world and stayed behind with him. Like a dog, nobody wanted. $22,000 still owed, still accruing. Laid off 11 months ago when the Ashford Hotel Group closed its Columbus property and cut 60 maintenance staff in one memo. No union, no severance worth the word. Currently self-employed, which was a generous way of saying he took whatever work came. 1 daughter, 8 recent hospitalization, another bill on the pile. Mortgage 2 months behind. Truck a 1998. And there at the bottom, the thing Daniel Vale's finger stopped on and tapped once slowly, the way a man taps a card he's been waiting for. Michael Carter had no license, no contractor's license, no plumbing license, no electrical certification. Everything he had was 30 years of knowing how, and not one piece of paper that said so. Daniel Vale closed the folder and smiled at nothing. "He's not a threat," he said into the phone. "He's a lever." But that was 400 miles away, and in Maplewood, nobody knew any of it yet, and for 9 days, the world was actually good. That was the cruel part. Michael would think about it later, and that was always the part that got him, that they got 9 good days first, so they'd know exactly what they were losing. Because in those 9 days, Michael Carter did something he had not done in 3 years. He let himself be happy. It happened in pieces the way it does. It happened when Claire found out he'd been eating cereal for dinner most nights, and simply started making 4 plates instead of 3, without ever once discussing it, so that dinner at her house stopped being an invitation and became a fact. It happened when Emma started saying "we" about things that included Lily. It happened when Michael woke up one morning and realized he hadn't done the thing he'd done every single morning for 3 years, which was reach across the bed to the empty side before he was awake enough to remember. He hadn't reached. He'd just woken up. He sat on the edge of his bed for a long time that morning, and he felt guilty about it. And then he felt guilty about feeling guilty, and then he went downstairs and made coffee and thought about what Rachel would have said. Rachel who'd been sharp as a tack right up to the end. Rachel who'd grabbed his hand in the hospice bed and said, "Michael Carter, don't you dare turn yourself into a monument." He'd told her he wouldn't. He'd lied, and they'd both known he was lying, and she'd let him have it because she was tired. He'd been a monument for 3 years. He was so tired of being a monument. And on the 9th day, standing in Claire's kitchen, with a wrench in his hand, and his head under her sink for the 4th or 5th time in a month, fixing a leak that they both knew perfectly well, was not really a leak anymore, Michael heard her say from somewhere above him very casually, "You know you don't have to keep finding reasons to come over." He stopped moving, under the sink in the dark, with a pipe in his hand. "I know," he said. "Do you?" "No." He heard her laugh. And then he heard her sit down on the floor right there next to him, her back against the cabinet, and she said, "Come out of there, Michael." He came out. He sat on the floor next to her with his back against the dishwasher and his knees up and his hands full of nothing, and neither one of them looked at the other. They just sat there side by side in a kitchen where a lot of things had happened. "I'm scared," Claire said. "Me too. I don't want to be the woman who I've got Lily. I can't just... I know. And you've got Emma, and she lost her mom, and if this went wrong... I know. And I still have a lawsuit and a man who... Claire." He turned his head. "I'm not asking you for anything. I want you to know that. I'm 57 years old with a bad back and a worse truck, and I've got nothing to offer anybody but showing up. That's it. That's the whole list. I show up." He looked back at the floor. "But I've been showing up here for a month, and I'd like to keep doing it, and I'd like to stop pretending it's about the plumbing." Claire was quiet. Then she leaned over very slightly and put her head on his shoulder. That was all. She didn't kiss him. He didn't kiss her. She just put her head on his shoulder and left it there. And Michael Carter sat on a kitchen floor with his heart going like a jackhammer, and understood that he had just been given something he had absolutely no idea what to do with. "Okay," she said. "Okay. Okay, we go slow. We go so slow, Michael. Because if this breaks, it doesn't just break us. It breaks 4 people." "Slow," he agreed. "I'm 57. Slow is the only speed I got left." And she laughed, and he felt it against his shoulder. And that was the last good hour before it all came apart. Because that afternoon, a car pulled onto Maplewood Lane that did not belong on Maplewood Lane. It was black, and it was long, and it was clean in a way no car in that neighborhood had ever been clean. And it parked in front of Claire's house, and a man got out of the back. Lily saw him first. She was on the porch. And Michael, who was across the street, fixing old Ruth Delaney's mailbox for $20 and a pie, saw the little girl go absolutely rigid, saw her back up 2 steps and then turn and run into the house screaming, "Mama! Mama! Mama!" Michael dropped the mailbox and was moving before the pieces hit the ground. By the time he got there, Claire was in the doorway with Lily behind her, and the man was standing at the bottom of the porch steps with his hands in his pockets. Relaxed, patient, like he had all day. Like he owned the porch and was just being polite about it. 50, maybe. Good coat, good shoes. The kind of man who'd never lifted anything heavier than a pen and had never once in his life needed to. "Hello, Claire," he said. "Get off my property. It's a rental." "Get off it anyway." Daniel Vale smiled. And Michael, coming up the walk fast, saw that smile and understood something instantly and completely. This man was enjoying himself. This wasn't business. This was a man who had come 400 miles for the pleasure of watching a woman's face when she saw him. "You've lost weight," Daniel said. "It doesn't suit you." "Lily, go inside. Now." "Oh, don't send her in on my account." "Hi, sweetheart." He waved. Lily pressed herself into the back of her mother's legs and did not wave back. "She's gotten big. Kids do that. You'd know more about it than me. Of course, you're the one who took her." "Don't you dare. I'm just observing." And that was when Michael arrived, and he came up the walk and put himself at the bottom of the steps, not between them exactly, but near enough that his shoulder was in the geometry of it, and he said, "Everything all right, Claire?" Daniel Vale turned, and he looked Michael Carter up and down, slow, taking in the work boots, and the grease under the fingernails, and the gray in his hair, and his eyebrows went up half an inch with delight. "Well," he said, "you must be Michael." Michael felt every hair on his arm stand up. "I'm sorry," he said evenly. "Have we met?" "No, but I know all about you." Daniel's smile got wider. "Michael Carter, 57, widower. Rachel, that was her name, right? Rachel. 22,000 still owed to Ohio Regional, which I have to say is aggressive of them, chasing a dead woman's bill for 3 years. Laid off in the Ashford closure. 2 months behind on the house. Daughter had a nasty fever a few weeks back. She, okay?" He tilted his head. "Emma, isn't it?" The world went very quiet in Michael's ears. "Michael," Claire said. "Michael, don't." "How do you know my daughter's name?" Michael said. It came out low and flat, and not at all like his voice. "I know everything about you. It cost me about what I spend on lunch." Daniel spread his hands, reasonable, friendly. "Don't take it personally. It's just what I do. Before I engage with something, I learn what it's made of. And you, Michael, no offense, you're made of about 11 pages. Michael took one step forward, and Daniel Vale did not move, did not flinch, because he absolutely knew that Michael wouldn't touch him. And Michael knew it too. That was the worst part. That was the part that made him feel like a man made of 11 pages. Because if he put one hand on that coat, there would be lawyers on his porch by morning, and they would take his house and his truck, and God help him, they might even take a look at who was raising Emma and Daniel. Vale had come here counting on that. He had built the whole conversation on it. "What do you want?" Claire said. 20 minutes. "No, Claire." And for the first time the friendly went out of his voice, and something underneath showed through, and it was not friendly at all. 20 minutes or I file the amended complaint Monday, and I add the thing we both know I can add, and then you can spend your 20 minutes with a lawyer you can't pay instead." He glanced at Lily, then back. "Your choice." Claire's hands were shaking. Michael saw them. 15, she said. 20. "Michael, take Lily to your house, please." "Claire, please." He took Lily. He carried her actually because she'd gone stiff and small and wouldn't walk, and he carried her across 2 yards and into his kitchen and set her down at the table next to Emma. And Emma took one look at her friend's face and did the single best thing anybody did that whole day. She scooted her chair over and put her arms around her without asking a single question. And Michael stood at his window and watched the black car in front of Claire's house for 18 minutes and 40 seconds, and he had never in his life felt so completely useless. When Daniel Vale came out, he did not go straight to the car. He walked across the yard to Michael's house, and he knocked on Michael's door. Michael opened it because there was nothing else to do. "May I?" Daniel said, and stepped inside before there was an answer and looked around the little house, the water stain on the ceiling. Michael had never gotten to the couch with the throw over the bad cushion. The two little girls at the kitchen table staring at him with wide eyes, and he took it all in with an expression of such perfect gentle sympathy that Michael wanted to put him through the wall. "Girls," Michael said, "upstairs. Now please." They went. They didn't want to. They went. "Nice place," Daniel said. "Say what you came to say." "All right." Daniel turned, and the sympathy went off his face like a light switch. "I'm going to make you an offer, and I want you to actually listen, because it's a good one, and you're not going to get another." He pulled an envelope from his coat and set it on the table. "There's $25,000 in there. Cash clean, no paperwork, no tax event, no strings but one. It's exactly enough to clear your wife's hospital debt and catch up your mortgage with a little left for the truck. I know that because I know your numbers better than you do." Michael looked at the envelope. "The one string," Daniel said, "is that you sell your house and you move 90 days, anywhere. Doesn't have to be far, just not next to her. Get out of my house. Michael, get out. I'm not finished." Daniel didn't move. "You think this is about jealousy. It isn't. I don't want her back, Michael. I want her back at work. Do you understand the difference? That company has 140 employees, and Claire is the only person alive who can do what Claire does. And without her, the whole thing is a slow-motion car wreck, and I need her in that building by fall, or a lot of people lose everything, including me. That's it. That's the whole thing. It's arithmetic. Then ask her." "I have asked her. I've asked her for a year. And she says no because she'd rather burn it down than help me, and I understand that I've made peace with it. So I stopped asking." He nodded at the envelope. "Now I'm removing the reason she's saying no." "I'm not the reason, Michael." Daniel almost looked sad. "You are the only reason. 6 weeks ago that woman was sitting on a folding chair in an empty house with her money frozen and she was 2 months from folding. 2 months. I had her. And then you fixed her sink." He shook his head slowly, and there was something almost like wonder in it. "You gave her a place to stand. You made this God-forsaken street feel like a home, and now she thinks she can hold out and she can't, and when she loses everything, and so does the kid. So you can be the man who took $25,000 and moved 8 miles, or you can be the man who stood on principle and watched her lose her daughter's future. And I want you to think very carefully about which one of those is actually the selfish choice." Michael stared at him, and here was the thing. The thing that made Michael's stomach turn over. It wasn't stupid. It was a lie somewhere. He could feel it. There was a lie hiding in it, but he couldn't find it. And part of it was true, and the true part had teeth. Because what did he have to offer her? $22,000 in debt. 2 months behind. He'd been telling himself he showed up. Showing up didn't unfreeze a bank account. Showing up didn't beat lawyers. "You've thought about it," Daniel said quietly, watching his face. "Haven't you? At 2 in the morning. What am I doing? What could a woman like that possibly want with a man like me?" Michael didn't answer. "Everybody has a number, Michael. It's not an insult. It's just true. And yours isn't even a number, it's a bill. It's your dead wife's hospital bill." Daniel tapped the envelope once. "Let me pay it. Let her go. Everybody wins." And Michael Carter stood in his own kitchen with his hands hanging at his sides, and he thought about Rachel, and he thought about the arithmetic he'd done at his daughter's bedside, and he felt the fear come up in him, the old fear, the "you are not enough." Fear that had lived in his chest since he was 9 years old, watching his father's hands shake over a bill he couldn't pay. And then he thought about a little girl in fogged-up glasses, whispering that her mother fell off the bed in the dark, and the fear just stopped. It didn't go away. It just stopped mattering. "You know what's funny?" Michael said. "What's that?" "You spent good money learning 11 pages about me." He picked up the envelope, weighed it in his hand, held it out. "And you still don't know the first thing." Daniel didn't take it. "Michael, You think I'm going to take a man's money to walk away from a woman who drove my sick kid to the hospital at 4 in the afternoon when I was too broke and too scared to do it myself? He pushed the envelope against Daniel's chest until he took it. Mister, I've been broke my whole life. Broke's not a mystery to me. I know exactly what it costs and exactly what it buys, and I'm telling you, standing right here in this house, you feel sorry for there isn't enough money in your coat to make me leave that woman alone in the dark with you. Daniel Vale looked at him for a long moment, and then very softly he said, Okay. And Michael felt a chill go through him because the man wasn't angry. He was satisfied, like something had been confirmed. You should know, Daniel said, folding the envelope back into his coat, that I did offer. I want that on the record between us, man to man. I offered you the easy version. He walked to the door, and then he stopped hand on the frame and turned back and asked pleasantly, How many houses have you worked on in this town, Michael? Since Ashford let you go. Ballpark. Michael's mouth went dry. 40, 50. Daniel nodded. That's what I'd have guessed. Plumbing, wiring, that little furnace job you did for her. Load-bearing work on that bed frame, even though that one's a stretch. He smiled. Do you know what the fine is in the state of Ohio for performing licensed trade work without a license per instance? The floor tilted. It's a lot, Daniel said. And that's just the state. The homeowners can come at you civilly. Insurance companies love it. Any claim on any house you touched, they'll deny it and then come looking for the man who did the work. Old lady across the street there, if her wiring ever cooks off and it turns out an unlicensed man was in her walls. He clicked his tongue. They'd take everything, and it wouldn't even be me doing it. That's the beautiful part. I don't have to do a thing but make one phone call to a board that already exists and let the machine do what the machine does. You're bluffing, Michael. Daniel looked genuinely deeply patient. I have never bluffed in my life. It's inefficient. He opened the door. 90 days. The offer stands until Friday. After that, I stop being generous and I start being thorough. And he left. Michael stood in his kitchen for a long time after the car pulled away. He didn't move. He couldn't. And then he heard a sound behind him, and he turned around and Emma was standing at the bottom of the stairs in her socks. Daddy, she said, are we in trouble? And Michael Carter, who had never lied to his daughter, opened his mouth and found that he couldn't do it, and he couldn't tell her the truth either, and so he just held out his arm and she came, and he pulled her in against his side and held on. 2 hours later, Claire came to his door. She'd been crying. She'd fixed her face, and it hadn't taken. And she stood on his porch with her arms wrapped around herself, and she said, He came here, didn't he? Yeah? What did he offer you? Doesn't matter. Michael, what did he offer you? $25,000 to move. Claire closed her eyes. God. I told him no. I know you did. Her voice cracked. That's the problem. I know you did, and that's Michael. Don't you understand what he does to people who tell him no? He doesn't get angry. He gets organized. She pressed the heels of her hands into her eyes. I've watched him do this. I watched him do it to a competitor once, a good man, a nice man with a small firm. And Daniel didn't fight him. He just found the one loose thread and pulled it for 18 months, until the man's whole life came apart, and Daniel bought the pieces at auction. And I was there. Michael, I was in the room, I was married to him. I told myself it was business. Claire. He knows about the license, doesn't he? Michael didn't answer. Oh, God. She sat down on his porch step like her legs had quit. Oh, God, he knows about the license. It's not Claire. Half the guys in this town don't have. That doesn't matter. That has never mattered. Nobody enforces it because nobody complains, and the second somebody complains, it's real, and Daniel doesn't need it to stick. Michael, he needs it to cost. He needs you in a hearing room on a Tuesday and a lawyer at $400 an hour and a fine. You can't pay, and a lien on the house you're already 2 months behind on. He doesn't need to win. He just needs it to be expensive enough that you break. She looked up at him, and her face was wrecked. And you will break. Not because you're weak, because you have a daughter. Because he'll make sure it's Emma's future on the scale. That's what he does. He finds the thing you love, and he makes it the price. Michael sat down on the step next to her. "So what do you want me to do?" he said. "I want you to take the money." He turned his head. "Say that again." "Take the money." She was crying now and not bothering to stop. "Take it, Michael. Clear Rachel's bill. Catch up your house. Move 8 miles. Move across town. It's nothing, it's not even far, and Emma keeps her father and her house and her Claire. And I'll be fine. I've been fine before. Claire, look at me." She wouldn't. "Look at me." She looked at him. "Say the true thing," Michael said. "Not the noble thing, the true one." And Claire Bennett's face came apart completely, and she said in a voice that barely made it out, "I don't want you to go. I've wanted one thing in 6 years, and it's for you not to go. And I'm asking you to go, and if you say yes, I will never forgive you, and if you say no, you'll lose everything. And either way, it's my fault, because I'm the thing that came to this street and ruined it. I am the broken thing, Michael. You keep looking for something to fix, and it's me. It was always me, and I don't have a part you can put in." And Michael sat there, and he let that sit, and then he said something so quiet, she almost missed it. "Claire," he said, "ask me the question you asked the first day." "What?" "The first day, under the sink, you asked me a question." He looked out at the street. "Ask it again." She stared at him. And then she remembered, and her breath caught. "You always help strangers like this," she whispered. "No," Michael said. "Not always." And he took her hand and he held it, and the two of them sat on his front step in the cold like two people at the edge of a cliff. "He's coming back Friday," Michael said. "Yes? Then we've got till Friday." "To do what?" And Michael Carter looked at the black tire marks on the road where a very expensive car had pulled away from his house, and something happened in his face that Claire had not seen there before. Something that had been asleep for 3 years under all that grief, and it woke up. "Claire," he said, "you said he needs you. In the building by fall. He said it too. He told me straight out he's got 140 people and a wreck coming, and you're the only one who can stop it." He turned to her. "He came 400 miles and knocked on my door and offered me 25 grand out of his own coat. Does that sound like a man who's winning to you?" Claire went very still. "He's not squeezing you because he's strong," Michael said. "He's squeezing you because he's out of time." And Claire Bennett looked at him, and for the first time in 6 years, something in her eyes changed the look of a woman who has been running for so long, she'd forgotten there was another direction remembering it. "Michael," she said slowly. "Say that again." "He's out of time," Michael said again. "That's what I'm telling you. Claire, I've spent 30 years in buildings. You know when a man calls me at 11 o'clock at night about a leak? Not when it's dripping, when it's already through the ceiling. Nobody pays for urgency until it's an emergency." He leaned forward on the step. "That man in the coat did not drive 400 miles to gloat at you. He drove 400 miles because something in his building is already through the ceiling, and he cannot fix it." Claire didn't move for a long moment. Then she stood up so fast she almost fell. "The Halverson contract," she said. "The what? Oh my God, Michael." She had both hands in her hair. "Halverson. It's a hotel group. They're building 9 properties. It's the biggest thing the firm ever landed, and we landed it because of me, because Elias Halverson liked my work. He liked me. He said it in the pitch room. He said, 'I'm buying Claire Bennett, the rest of you are overhead,' and Daniel laughed, and I thought he was laughing." Her voice was climbing. "If that contract has a key person clause, Michael, if that contract has a key person clause, and I'm the key person, then when you left, then he's been in breach for a year and he's been hiding it." She turned around, and she looked like somebody had run a current through her. "That's why the frozen accounts. That's why he's been dragging the lawsuit instead of closing it. A closed case is a public record. A settlement is a disclosure. And if Halverson finds out I'm gone and not coming back, they walk. And if Halverson walks, the bank calls the line of credit, and if the bank calls the line..." She stopped dead. 140 people. "He told me that number," Michael said quietly. He told me himself. He thought he was threatening me with it. Claire sat back down on the step, hard. He wasn't threatening you, she whispered. He was begging. Michael, he came to your kitchen with cash in his coat because he has nothing else left to spend. He's been out of moves for a year and I never knew because I was too busy hiding in a house with no furniture. She started to laugh. And then the laugh turned into something else, and she put her hand over her mouth, and Michael put a hand on her back and just left it there while it went through her. 6 years, she said. 6 years I've been afraid of him, and he's been afraid of me. Sounds about right, Michael said. Bullies mostly are. I don't have the contract. She sat up. The panic swung back like a door. Michael, I don't have anything. I don't have a copy. I don't have the files. I don't have the emails. I don't have a lawyer. I can't get discovery without a lawyer, and I can't pay a lawyer, and it's Wednesday, and he'll be back Friday. Who would have a copy? Nobody I can... She stopped. Claire. She swallowed. There's one person. Maybe. And I don't have the right to ask her. Who? Her name is Dolores Ruiz. She was my office manager for 8 years. She's 61 years old, Michael, and she's got a son with MS, and her whole insurance is that company. And when Daniel pushed me out, she stood up in a meeting and said it was wrong out loud in front of everybody. And he kept her on. Do you know why he kept her on? Claire's eyes were wet. Because keeping her is worse. Because every day she comes to work she has to look at what she said and swallow it, and he gets to watch. That's what he does. He doesn't fire people. He keeps them. Call her. I can't ask her to risk her son's insurance for me. I can't, Michael. I ran. I left her there. I didn't even say goodbye. I disappeared because I couldn't stand for anybody to see me lose. She probably hates me, and she'd be right to. And Michael Carter, who had spent 3 years being exactly the same coward, in exactly the same way, said the truest thing he knew how to say. Claire, I closed my shutters for 3 years, and everybody in this town let me. You know how many people knocked? He held up his fist. 0. Not because they didn't care. Because they figured I'd say no. He looked at her. You don't get to decide her answer for her. That's not protecting her. That's just you deciding for another person that she's too small to be brave, and Claire, she already was. She stood up in a room and said it was wrong. You're the one who ran. Claire stared at him. That's the meanest thing anybody said to me in 6 years, she said. I know. You're right, though. I know that too. She got out her phone. Her hands were shaking so bad she dropped it once. And she called a number she'd had memorized for 8 years and never once dialed, and it rang and rang. And Michael watched her face go from terror to despair as it kept ringing. And then it picked up, and a woman's voice said, Claire. And Claire Bennett opened her mouth, and nothing came out. Claire Bennett, is that you cool, Dolores, Claire said. And it broke in half. Oh, honey. And Michael, sitting 6 inches away, heard the woman on the other end start to cry. Oh, honey. Oh, mija, I have been waiting a year for this phone call. I have been waiting a year. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry I left you. Stop it. Stop that right now. Dolores Ruiz blew her nose loud and came back stronger. You listened to me. You didn't leave me. He threw you out of your own building with a security guard on each arm. I watched it. And then he told all of us you had a breakdown and quit. That's what he told the whole office. That's what they still think. Claire's face went white. He what? Every single person in that building thinks you walked out on them. He said it in a staff meeting with his sad little face on. Claire's not well. Claire needs time. Dolores made a sound like she wanted to spit. I've had a year of watching people who loved you decide you abandoned them. So don't you dare apologize to me. You want to apologize? Apologize by asking me for something. Because I have been sitting at that desk for a year with a folder in my drawer waiting for somebody to ask. Michael watched Claire's whole body change. Dolores, she said carefully. What folder? You think I'm stupid. You think I sat there for 8 years answering that man's phone and didn't learn how he thinks. A pause. The day they walked you out, I went back to my desk and I printed everything I had access to, before they got around to changing my permissions, which took them 6 days, by the way. 6 days. That's how much attention that man pays to a 61-year-old woman with a headset. Another pause. Claire, ask me what's in the folder. Claire could barely speak. What's in the folder? The Halverson Master Agreement, Dolores said. All 90 pages, including Exhibit C. Claire made a sound Michael had never heard a person make. Section 9.4, Dolores said. You want me to read it to you, honey, or you want to say it with me? Key person, Claire whispered. Designated key person Claire Bennett. Dolores's voice was shaking with something that wasn't fear. In the event the designated key person ceases active involvement, client shall be notified in writing within 30 days, and may at its sole discretion terminate without penalty and recover fees paid to date. She let it sit. Fees paid to date, Claire. You know what they've paid to date? Don't. $4.1 million. Claire put her head between her knees. And here's the part that keeps me up at night, Dolores said. There's no notification letter. There is no letter, Claire. I've been through every file, every folder, every archive I can still touch, and that letter was never written and never sent. He's been sending them your design boards for a year, with your name on them, signed by you. Michael sat up straight. Wait, say that part again. Who's that? That's Michael, Claire said muffled. He's my neighbor. Ma'am, Michael said. You're telling me this man has been sending a client work with her signature on it, and she hasn't worked there in a year. Digital signature, Dolores said grimly. On the deliverable cover sheets. Everyone, since last March. Claire. Michael's voice had gone very quiet. Claire, sit up. She sat up. That's not a contract problem, Michael said. I'm a plumber, and even I know that's not a contract problem. That's fraud. Nobody said anything for about 5 seconds. There it is, Dolores said softly. There it is. That's the word nobody in that building has been brave enough to say out loud in a year. And Claire Bennett started to laugh, and it was not a nice laugh. It was 6 years of terror coming out sideways, and she laughed until she had to hold on to Michael's arm to stay upright. And then she stopped laughing all at once, and her face went hard and clear, and Michael saw for the first time the woman who had built a company from nothing at 26 years old. Dolores, she said, can you get that folder out of the building, honey? Dolores Ruiz said, it's been in my car for 11 months. They had 39 hours. Claire didn't sleep. Michael didn't either, and neither of them made a thing of it. They just worked the two of them at her little table with every light in the house on and the coffee going all night, and it was the strangest kind of night Michael had ever spent in his life, because he could not help with one single piece of it, and he helped with all of it anyway. He couldn't read a contract, but he could keep her fed, and he did. He couldn't understand a damages calculation, but at 3 a.m. when she hit the wall and said, I can't, Michael, I can't. Who am I kidding? He has lawyers. He could put a hand flat on the table and say, Claire, when your pipe blew, did you know how to fix it? No. Did that make it unfixable? No. Then shut up and hand me the wrench. And she'd laughed wetly and gone back to work. Dolores drove up at 6 a.m. 4 hours through the dark in a 15-year-old Corolla with a folder in a grocery bag on the passenger seat, like it was the most dangerous thing in Ohio, which for one man in a glass building, it absolutely was. When Claire opened the door, the two women stood there looking at each other for a second, and then Dolores dropped the bag and grabbed her, and they held on to each other in the doorway, and made an unholy amount of noise, and Michael went and stood in the kitchen and let them have it. Dolores Ruiz turned out to be about 5'0" and built like a fire hydrant, and she took one look at Michael and said, You're the plumber. Yes, ma'am. You told him no. Michael blinked. How do you? Because he came back Tuesday in a mood I have not seen in 9 years, and he closed his door and he didn't come out. Dolores jabbed a finger at his chest. Do you understand what you did? Nobody tells him no. Nobody has ever told him no. He came back here and he sat in the dark, mister. She looked him up and down. I like you. By noon, they had it laid out on the table, and it was worse than Claire had guessed, and better, which in Michael's experience is what the truth usually is. Daniel Vale hadn't just failed to notify Halverson. He'd been actively representing that Claire was still designing. He'd been billing against her rate. And Dolores, God bless her, had 11 months of the internal deliverable log, which showed exactly which junior designers had actually done the work that went out under Claire's name. "He's not just in breach," Claire said. She'd stopped shaking sometime around dawn. Her voice was flat and steady and cold. "He's committed fraud against a client with $4 million in it. And if I walk into Elias Halverson's office with this folder, Daniel doesn't lose a lawsuit. Daniel loses everything, and probably in handcuffs." "Good," Dolores said. And Claire looked down at the table for a long moment. 140 people, she said. Nobody spoke. "Halverson walks the bank, calls the line, and the firm is gone inside of a quarter," Claire said. "Everybody in that building loses their job, including you, Dolores, including your insurance." Dolores's chin came up. "I brought you the folder anyway." "I know you did." Claire's eyes were bright. "That's exactly why I'm not going to use it like that." Michael sat back in his chair. "Claire?" Dolores said carefully. "Honey, that folder is a gun." "Yes," Claire said. "And I've spent 6 years running from a man who points guns at people, and I'm not going to become him on a Thursday afternoon because I'm finally holding one." She looked up, and there were tears on her face, but her voice didn't move an inch. "I don't want him in handcuffs. I want my company back. Those are not the same thing, and I have exactly one shot to make sure I get the right one." And Michael Carter, sitting at that table with grease still under his fingernails, understood at last what Elias Halverson had meant when he said he was buying Claire Bennett. Friday, 9 a.m. The black car pulled onto Maplewood Lane exactly on time, because of course it did, and Daniel Vale got out with his coat and his shoes and his patient, pleasant face, and he walked up Claire's front steps, and the door opened before he knocked. "Come in," Claire said. He stopped. That was the first thing. Michael, watching from the corner, saw it a half-second hitch, because the woman in that doorway was not the woman he'd seen on Tuesday, and men like Daniel Vale read rooms for a living. He came in, and there was Michael standing against the wall with his arms folded, and there sitting at the little table with her purse in her lap like she was at church was Dolores Ruiz. Daniel Vale looked at Dolores for a very long 3 seconds. "Dolores," he said, "you're not at your desk." "No, sir," Dolores said. "I'm not." "Sit down, Daniel," Claire said. "I'll stand." "Sit down." And Daniel Vale sat down. And Michael watched a man who'd never lost a room in his life sit down in a kitchen in a foreclosed house in Maplewood, Ohio. And it was the single most satisfying thing he had ever seen. Claire put the folder on the table. She didn't open it. "Section 9.4, she said. Daniel's face did not change, but his hand resting on the table went perfectly still, and Michael saw it, and Claire saw it, and Dolores saw it, and everybody in that kitchen knew. "There's no notification letter," Claire said. 30 days. That was March of last year. It's been 14 months, and there is no letter, and every deliverable that's gone to Halverson since has my signature on it, and I haven't been in the building." She leaned forward. "Do you want to tell me what that is, Daniel, or should the plumber tell you, because he got it in about 4 seconds?" Daniel Vale said nothing. "You didn't come here to threaten me," Claire said. "You came here because Halverson's Phase 3 review is in September, and you cannot get through it without me in that room. And if you don't get through it, they audit. And if they audit, they find the letter that doesn't exist. And then it isn't a contract dispute anymore. It's a criminal referral. You've got 4 months, and you've been out of moves for a year, and you were so desperate you drove 400 miles to buy off a man for $25,000. She sat back. "You've never once in your life spent your own cash on anything you could bill. That's how I knew." And Daniel Vale finally spoke, and his voice had lost something. "What do you want?" "You're going to hear the whole thing before you answer," Claire said. "First, you resign as CEO, not tomorrow. Today in writing before you leave this house." You stay on the cap table as a passive minority holder because I'm not going to blow a hole in the balance sheet to feel good. But you have no operational role, no vote, and you never speak to a client again. Claire. Second, the lawsuit is dismissed with prejudice, and my accounts are unfrozen by Monday, and I'll know if they're not. Third. Her voice dropped. You write a letter to every employee in that building, and you tell them exactly what you told them a year ago was a lie, that I didn't have a breakdown, that I didn't abandon them, that you walked me out with a guard on each arm because I wouldn't sign what you wanted me to sign. She was crying now silently, and her voice never wavered. You've had 140 people thinking I quit on them, Daniel. Dolores has had a year of it. You're going to fix that in writing with your name at the bottom. And fourth, Michael said. Everyone looked at him. Fourth, Michael said, pushing off the wall, is that Dolores Ruiz's son's insurance doesn't get touched. Not now, not in a year, not ever. That's in writing too. Dolores made a small sound and put her hand over her mouth. Daniel looked around the kitchen slowly. At the woman he'd robbed. At the woman he'd kept to punish. At the man he'd tried to buy. And if I say no, he said, you take it to Halverson, and the firm dies, and 140 people lose everything, including her. He nodded at Dolores. You'd be doing what I did. Yes, Claire said. I know. Then you won't do it. Daniel! And Claire smiled, and it was the saddest smile Michael had ever seen. You were married to me for 9 years, and you still think a person's floor is the same thing as their ceiling. That's why you always lose the long ones. You think I want to do it. I don't want to do it. But you taught me something in 9 years, and it's the only thing you ever gave me that was worth keeping. I know exactly what it costs to lose everything. She leaned in. I've already paid it. I paid it a year ago. I have been living on a folding chair with my daughter on a mattress on the floor, and I survived it, and you cannot threaten a person with a place they've already lived. But you've never been broke a day in your life. You wouldn't last a month. She tapped the folder once. So ask yourself which one of us is actually willing to burn it down. And be honest, because you've got about 90 seconds. The kitchen was so quiet, Michael could hear the new pipe under the sink ticking as it warmed. Daniel Vale looked at the folder. And then, for 1 second, something moved across his face that Michael had not expected at all, and it took him a moment to name it, and when he did, it was worse than everything else, because it was grief. You never once looked at me the way you look at him, Daniel said. Claire didn't answer. 9 years. He said it quietly. I built the money. I did. I built every dollar of it, and you never once. He stopped, straightened his cuff, and when he looked up, the face was back on smooth and pleasant and empty. I'll need paper. Michael handed him a pen. It took 40 minutes. Dolores had brought the forms because Dolores had been that man's office manager for 8 years and knew exactly which forms, and she stood over his shoulder while he signed and did not say one word. And Michael would remember, until the day he died, the sight of a 61-year-old woman in a church cardigan watching a man sign away his empire in a rented kitchen. At 10:12 in the morning, Daniel Vale set down the pen. He stood. He buttoned his coat. He walked to the door, and he stopped, and he turned around, and he looked at Michael Carter. 25,000, he said. That's what I thought a man like you was worth. I know, Michael said. I've never been that wrong about a number. No, Michael said. You've been wrong about numbers your whole life, mister. You just never had to find out. And Daniel Vale walked out and got into the black car, and it pulled away from Maplewood Lane, and it never came back. Nobody moved for about 10 seconds. Then Dolores Ruiz sat down in a chair and burst into tears, and Claire went to her, and Michael turned around and put both hands on the counter and leaned on it, because his legs had picked that moment to inform him he was 57. And that's when he heard the giggling. He looked up. 2 little girls were standing at the top of the stairs in their pajamas. Emma and Lily, who had been told in the strongest possible terms to stay at his house, and they were peering through the railing with their eyes enormous. Girls, Michael said, how long have you been there? The whole time, Emma said. Emma. Dad. He sat down, Emma breathed. Lily's mom made him sit down, and Lily Bennett pushed her glasses up her nose and looked down at her mother. Her mother, who was standing in the middle of a kitchen with her arms around a crying 61-year-old woman and a year of her life handed back to her in 40 minutes, and Lily said in that whisper that was not quiet at all, "Told you. Grown-ups just need help sometimes." Michael Carter had expected to feel something like victory. What he felt standing in that kitchen at 10:14 in the morning with the black car gone and Dolores Ruiz crying into Claire's shoulder was closer to what a man feels at the end of a long shift. Empty. Shaky in the hands. Aware suddenly of every single hour he'd been awake. "Somebody should probably say something," Dolores said thickly. "Somebody should probably eat," Michael said. "I'm making eggs." "You're making eggs. Ma'am, I've got 2 little girls at the top of those stairs who've been up since 5 running an unauthorized surveillance operation, a woman who hasn't slept in 2 days, and you drove 4 hours in the dark with the most dangerous grocery bag in Ohio. Yes, I'm making eggs." And that was how the morning Claire Bennett got her company back ended, with a plumber frying eggs in a kitchen with 1 working pan, and Dolores Ruiz sitting at the table saying, "Adios," every 30 seconds, like she was starting a car that wouldn't turn over, and 2 little girls eating off paper plates because there still weren't real ones, and Claire standing at the counter holding a signed resignation letter in one hand and a fork in the other, unable to make herself put either one down. "Claire," Michael said. "Sit." "I can't." "Sit down." She sat. And she looked at the folder on the table, and then at the letter, and then at nothing. "It's not real," she said. "It's real. Michael, it's been 40 minutes. 6 years, and it took 40 minutes. "No, ma'am." He set a plate in front of her. "It took 6 years. The last 40 minutes was just the part where everybody found out." She looked up at him, and then she started to shake. Not crying, shaking the whole body, hands, jaw, the way people do when the adrenaline finally figures out it's not needed anymore. And Michael crouched down beside her chair and put his hand over both of hers and just held on while it went through her, and Dolores got up and went and stood between Claire and the girls so they couldn't see, which Michael thought was maybe the kindest reflex he'd ever watched a person have. "I'm okay," Claire kept saying. "I'm okay. I'm okay." "You're not," Michael said. "That's allowed. Nobody's grading it." It took about 90 seconds. When it passed, she took a long breath and wiped her face with the back of her wrist and picked up her fork like nothing had happened, and Michael understood that this was a woman who had been holding a wall up by herself for so long that setting it down was going to take longer than picking it up ever had. "Eat," he said. She ate. The letter went out Monday at 9 a.m. Claire read it once and then couldn't read it again. Dolores read it 4 times out loud in the car on the drive down and had to pull over twice. It said everything Claire had demanded in Daniel Vale's own flat corporate voice, which somehow made it worse and better at the same time. "The statements I made to staff in March of last year regarding Ms. Bennett's departure were false. Ms. Bennett did not resign. Ms. Bennett did not experience a breakdown. Ms. Bennett was removed from the company at my direction. At 9:04, a woman named Priya from the junior design pool called Dolores's cell phone from a stairwell and could not get a full sentence out. At 9:20, the entire 3rd floor stopped working. At 9:41, a man named Terry, 44 years old, 16 years with the firm, a man Claire had personally hired out of a community college drafting program, sent Claire Bennett a 2-line email that said, "I believed him. I'm so sorry. Please come back." Claire read that one in her car in a parking lot outside Columbus and put her forehead on the steering wheel and stayed there for 11 minutes. "I hated them," she told Michael that night. She was sitting on his porch step. It was where they'd started doing this somehow. "That's the part I can't, Michael. For a year, I hated every single one of them. I thought they watched him do it and said nothing. I built up this whole thing in my head about how they let it happen, and I used it. I needed it, because if they were cowards, then I wasn't a failure. I was just betrayed." Her voice cracked. "And they didn't even know. They were grieving me. They thought I broke." "Yeah," Michael said. That's all you're gonna say? Well, I could say I told you so. He shrugged. But you got there yourself, so. She laughed wetly. God, you're insufferable. I've been told. By who? My wife, Michael said, constantly. And there it was, out in the air between them, the first time he'd ever said it like that. Easy, warm past tense and present tense at the same time, and Claire went very still beside him. Michael. It's all right. Is it? He thought about it. He'd promised himself a long time ago he'd never lie to this woman just to make a moment easier. Some days, he said, some days it's fine. Some days I'll be doing something stupid buttering toast and it comes up out of the floor and takes my legs. That's just how it is. That's not going away. He looked at his hands. But I'll tell you the thing I figured out. I used to think if I ever wanted anything again, it'd mean she didn't matter. Like I was voting her out. He shook his head slowly. That's not how a heart works. It's not a house with one room. She's got hers. Nobody's ever getting that one. He turned his head and looked at her. But there's a lot of house, Claire. And I've been living in one room for 3 years and it's cold in there. Claire didn't say anything. She just took his hand. And they sat there in the dark and didn't talk for a long time. And inside through the window, 2 little girls were arguing about a card game. And it was the best sound Michael Carter had heard in 3 years. Then Claire said, I need to tell you something and you're going to be difficult about it. Great. I want you to come work for me. No, Michael said. Michael. No, ma'am. You didn't even. Don't need to. He pulled his hand back gently and put it on his knee. Claire, I'm real happy for you. I mean that. But you're about to walk back into a building with 140 people in it who all think you're something close to a saint right now. And the last thing you need is to walk in there with a 57-year-old handyman on your arm that you invented a job for. They'd smile at me, and they'd talk when I left the room. He shook his head. I'm not gonna be a thing you did for me. Claire was quiet for a second. Then she said, Wow, you really think I'd do that? I think you'd want to. Michael, look at me. She turned on the step. I did not offer you a job because I feel sorry for you. I offered you a job because I have 9 hotels going up in 14 months, and every single one of them is going to be built by a general contractor who tells me my specs are impossible, and I have spent my entire career sitting in rooms full of men who lied to me about buildings because they knew I couldn't check. Her voice sharpened. And then a man walked into my kitchen and looked at a pipe for 4 seconds and told me exactly how long it had been failing, why, and what it would do next. And he was right. He was right about the pipe. He was right about the furnace. He was right about my ex-husband, and I'm the one with the MBA. Michael didn't say anything. Do you have any idea what a designer would pay to have a man in the room who knows what a building actually does? Claire said. Not what it looks like, what it does. At 2 in the morning in February when the pump fails. I've been designing spaces for 18 years for people like you to maintain, and I have never once had one of you in the room, and it shows, Michael. Every project I've ever done has a room in it that some poor guy has to crawl through on his back and curse my name. That's true, actually, Michael admitted. You people put the shutoffs in the dumbest places I ever seen. Thank you. She threw her hands up. That's the job. That's the entire job. Come tell me the shutoffs are in the dumb place before it's poured in concrete instead of after. Michael sat there. I don't have a license, he said quietly. And there it was, the real one, the thing underneath. Claire's voice dropped. I know. 30 years, Claire. 30 years, and there's not one piece of paper anywhere in the world says I know how to do the only thing I know how to do. That's... He stopped, rubbed his mouth. You know what he did to me in my kitchen in about 9 seconds? He found the one thing I'm ashamed of, and he picked it up like a rock. And the worst part is I couldn't even be mad, because he was right. 57 years old, and I've been doing work I'm technically not allowed to do, because I couldn't afford the classes when I was 22. And then there was Rachel, and then there was Emma, and then there was... His jaw worked. It's just always been the next year. It's been the next year for 35 years. Claire looked at him for a long moment. So take the classes, she said. I'm 57. And I'd be sitting in a room with a bunch of 22-year-olds. Michael. She actually laughed. Do you hear yourself? You just watched a 61-year-old woman with a headset take down a man worth $40 million because she printed some PDFs. You want to talk to me about being too old to start? Michael opened his mouth, closed it. That's a cheap shot, he said. Yes, Claire agreed. And he didn't have an and. He enrolled on a Thursday. He didn't tell anybody. That was the thing about Michael Carter. He'd tell you the truth all day long if you asked, but he'd walk into a fire before he'd let you watch him be afraid. So he drove to the community college in Newark by himself and sat in a parking lot for 20 minutes with his hands on the wheel, and then he went in and stood in a line behind a kid who couldn't have been 19. And when the woman at the desk asked him what program he was interested in, he heard his own voice come out about half its usual size. Plumbing licensure, he said. The certification track. She typed. Any prior experience? Michael looked at his hands on the counter. 30 years of scars. The knuckle that never set right after a water heater fell on it in 2004. The permanent gray in the creases that no soap on earth had ever gotten out. A little, he said. He came home, and he didn't tell Claire, and he didn't tell Emma, and he made it 4 days before Emma found the textbook under the seat of the truck. Dad. Yeah, baby. What's this? Michael looked in the rearview mirror. His 8-year-old was holding a $180 textbook the size of a cinder block with both arms like a raccoon holding a melon. That's a book. Dad. It's... He put on his blinker. Didn't answer. Are you going to school? A little bit of school. And Emma Carter, 8 years old, sat back in her booster seat in absolute silence for about 4 seconds, and then screamed so loud, Michael nearly went off the road. Emma. You're going to school. Dad. Dad, we're both in school. Emma, it's not a big... Can I quiz you? No. Can I quiz you? Yeah, all right. She quizzed him every night for 11 weeks. She'd sit on the counter with the cinder block open in her lap and read out definitions in her most serious teacher voice, mispronouncing every third word, and Michael would answer while he cooked, and about a third of the time he'd stop and say, That's wrong. That book's wrong. Don't write that down. And Emma would say, Dad, you can't fight the book. And Michael would say, Watch me. Lily started coming to the quizzes. Then Claire started coming to the quizzes. And Michael Carter, who had spent 35 years being ashamed that he'd never been allowed to be a student, ended up studying for his licensure exam at a kitchen table with 2 little girls and a woman correcting his flashcards. And he would tell people for the rest of his life that it was the best 11 weeks of his adult existence. He passed on the first try, 94 out of 100. He got the letter on a Tuesday and stood in his driveway holding it and read it 4 times, and then he sat down on the tailgate of the truck, and then he put his face in his hands, and that's where Claire found him 10 minutes later. She came running because she thought he'd failed. Michael, oh God, Michael, it's okay, you can take it again. He handed her the letter without looking up. She read it, and she made a sound like she'd been punched and grabbed his shoulder. 94. 94, Michael said into his hands. Michael, that's why are you... Because there's a piece of paper, he said. And Claire Bennett understood, and she sat down on the tailgate next to him, and she didn't say a word. 35 years, Michael said. His voice was gone. 35 years I did the work, and there was never a piece of paper. And every single time somebody looked at me sideways, every time some guy at a job site talked to me like I was the help, every time my own daughter's school sent home a form asking my occupation, and I sat there with a pen trying to figure out what to write. He stopped, breathed. I've got a piece of paper, Claire. I'm not a guy who fixes stuff. I'm a licensed plumber in the state of Ohio, And there's a man in a glass building 400 miles from here who can't do a damn thing about it, and he's the reason I finally did it, and I will never ever tell him that." Claire started laughing and crying at the same time. "You're insufferable," she said. "I'm licensed," Michael said. He took the job, not the invented one. There wasn't one. Claire, it turned out, had not been kidding. She made him interview in a real room with a real panel, and he came out of it gray in the face and said, "That was worse than the exam." And the head of construction ops, a woman named Anne, who'd been building hotels for 25 years, called Claire afterward and said, "Where did you find him?" "He caught 2 things in the Phase 1 drawings in 15 minutes. 2 things, Claire. We've had those drawings for a year." He started in September. Field liaison, they called it, which, as far as Michael could ever determine, meant they paid him to walk into a room full of people arguing about a building and say the thing everybody already knew and nobody would say. He was catastrophically good at it, because here was the thing nobody in that building had understood, until Michael Carter showed up. A general contractor will lie to a designer all day long. He will not lie to a man who has been under that sink. The first time a GC tried to tell Michael a run was impossible. Michael listened politely, walked over, put his hand on the wall and said, "You don't want to do it. That's fine. Say that. Don't tell me it's impossible. I did it in 2011, in a building older than this one, and I did it alone, and I was 50. And the man went red to the ears, and Michael said, "It's all right. Just tell me the real number, and let's go from there." And they got it done. The Phase 3 review passed in September. Elias Halverson himself flew in for it, 71 years old, and about as warm as a bank vault. And he sat through 90 minutes and said almost nothing. And at the end he looked at Claire and said, "Where were you?" And Claire Bennett said, "I was gone, and now I'm not." And Halverson looked at her for a long moment, and then unbelievably smiled. "Good," he said. "I don't want to know." He never did find out. That was the part that ate at Michael for a while, that Daniel Vail walked away, kept his shares, took his money, and never once had to stand in a room and answer for it. Michael brought it up exactly once on the porch in October. "Doesn't it eat you?" he said. He got away with it. And Claire thought about it a long time. "He's 52 years old," she said finally, "and he's sitting in a house he doesn't need, with money he can't spend on the only thing he ever actually wanted, watching a company with his name on the door do better without him than it ever did with him." She sipped her coffee. "He gets a statement every quarter, Michael. Every 90 days he opens an envelope and finds out I'm winning." She smiled a little. "No, it doesn't eat me. I sleep great." "That's cold." "That's interest," Claire said. Dolores Ruiz became chief of staff in October. She fought it for 6 days. She said she was a secretary. Claire said she'd been running that building for 8 years and just hadn't been paid for it, and Dolores said, "That's not the same thing." And Claire said, "Dolores, you memorized the master agreement of a $4 million contract and identified a key person clause without a law degree. Please stop." And Dolores cried in the bathroom for 10 minutes and then came out and said, "I want a window." She got a window. Her son's insurance never lapsed, not once. Claire had that in writing, and she checked personally every quarter for the rest of her working life. The house happened in the spring. Michael had been paid, actually paid, on the 15th and the 30th, like a person for 6 months, and Rachel's hospital bill was gone. That was the first thing he did. He didn't tell anybody about that either. He just drove to Columbus and paid it in person in the office with a cashier's check. And the woman behind the glass said, "You know, most people just mail it." And Michael said, "Ma'am, I've been carrying this for 3 years. I'd like to hand it to somebody." He sat in his truck in that parking lot for a while afterward. "Okay, Rach," he said. "Okay." Then he went home. The house next door, the other one, the one on the other side, the one that had been rotting since the Delaney's moved to Florida, came up cheap because it was a wreck. Michael and Claire bought it together, and half the neighborhood thought they were insane, and Michael thought so too some days. He rebuilt it himself. Weekends and evenings all spring and half a summer, with a licensed man's confidence and a 58-year-old man's back. He put in a bedroom for Emma with a window seat, because she'd drawn one once when she was 6, and he'd never forgotten it. He put in a room for Lily with a nightlight built into the wall, hardwired no plug, so it could never come unplugged. And when she saw it, she didn't say anything at all. She just walked over and put her hand flat on it. He built Claire a studio with north light because she'd mentioned it once in passing 8 months earlier, and he'd written it down on the back of a receipt. And he built a table. He spent 2 months on that table. Oak, big enough for 8, which was ridiculous, and everybody said so, and he built it anyway. They finished on a Saturday in July. And the girls ran through it screaming, actually screaming the way kids do, and Dolores drove up with a plant that was too big for the room and a foil pan of something that fed 14 people, and half of Maplewood came because it turned out that Street had been watching this whole thing for 2 years and had opinions. And that night, when everybody had gone and the girls had crashed and the house was quiet, Claire found Michael standing in the kitchen with his hand on the table. "Hey," she said. "Hey. You know you're allowed to sit at it." "Yeah." He didn't move. "I know." She came and stood next to him. "You remember what you thought you were doing?" she said. "That first morning." "I thought I was fixing a sink," Michael said. "You were gone 20 minutes. I was gone an hour, and then I came back the next day with a bed in my truck, which in retrospect—" "Michael." She turned to face him. "Do you know what you actually fixed?" He shook his head. "You fixed the part of me that thought I deserved it," Claire said. "That's what he did to me, and I never told you, and I need to say it out loud one time. For 6 years I believed that what happened to me was what I got for being stupid enough to trust somebody. And I built a whole life around never being that stupid again. And then, a man broke my gate down because he heard my kids scream, and he wouldn't take my money, and he came back the next day, and he came back the day after that. And every single day you came back, you were arguing with me. You never said one word about it. You just kept showing up until I couldn't hold the argument anymore." Her eyes were shining. "You didn't fix my sink, Michael. You fixed my evidence." Michael had to look at the ceiling for a second. "Well," he said, "what did you fix?" And Claire Bennett took his hand, both of hers around his, the way you'd hold something that had been dropped too many times. "You had a heart in a box in the ground," she said quietly. "And I dug it up." Michael Carter, 58 years old, licensed plumber in the state of Ohio, put his forehead down against hers and closed his eyes, and for the first time since a Tuesday in a hospice room 3 years earlier, he wasn't a monument. He was just a man in his kitchen. They got married in October in the backyard with 40 people, and a caterer Dolores fought with. Emma and Lily walked Claire down together because there was no way on God's earth either one of them was going to let the other do it alone, and they'd worked it out between themselves weeks before and simply informed the adults of the decision. At the reception, Lily Bennett, 8 years old now, glasses still too big, still whispering at a volume you could hear across a room, climbed up on a chair and clinked a fork against a glass like she'd seen in a movie, and Michael Carter's blood ran cold. "Lily," Claire said. "Baby, what are you doing?" "I have to say something." "Lily, it's my duty," Lily said with enormous dignity, and the whole backyard laughed, and she waited them out. And then she said into 40 people's silence, "I broke the bed on purpose." The laughing stopped. "What?" Claire said. "Not the sink," Lily clarified. "The sink was real, but after he fixed the sink he left and I didn't want him to leave, so I broke the leg on the bed the rest of the way, and then I told him about it." She pushed her glasses up. "And Mama got mad at me for telling him, but she was already crying before I said it so." Nobody moved. Claire turned very slowly to look at her daughter. "Lily Bennett," she said. "Are you telling me grown-ups need help sometimes?" Lily said. And Michael Carter started to laugh, and it came up out of him so hard he had to sit down, and Dolores Ruiz spilled an entire glass of wine on a folding table, and Emma yelled, "I told you she did it!" And Claire covered her face with both hands and laughed until she couldn't breathe. Michael got up. He walked over and crouched down in front of that chair, so he was eye level with an 8-year-old in fogged-up glasses, the same way he had on a flooded kitchen floor 2 years before. "Lily," he said, "look at me." She looked at him. "That was the bravest thing anybody did in this whole story," Michael said. You know that everybody in this yard, me, your mom, Dolores, we all spent years being scared to ask for one thing. And you were 7 and you were terrified and you walked up to a stranger and asked out loud. Out loud. His voice went. You started all of it, kid. You started the whole thing. And Lily Bennett, who had waited 2 years to be told that, threw her arms around his neck so hard she knocked his hat off. He built her a new bed eventually. A bigger one when she outgrew the first. He kept the old one. Put it up in the garage rafters, and every time somebody said he should throw it out, he'd say the same thing. Nope. Michael, it's a broken kid's bed. It's not broken, he'd say. It never was. That's the whole point. And that's the thing Michael Carter told people for the rest of his life at job sites, at parent nights, at Emma's wedding. 20 years later, when he stood up with gray hair and a bad back, and a voice that only made it halfway through, a man goes his whole life thinking his worth is what he's got in the bank, that the world weighs you and hands you a number. And Michael Carter had believed that number was small, and he'd carried it like a stone since he was 9 years old. And a rich man in a good coat had walked into his kitchen one day and put an exact figure on it, $25,000. He'd been wrong. Not a little wrong. Wrong the way a man is wrong who has spent his entire life measuring water and calling it a river. Because the truth is this, and Michael Carter would swear to it on anything you put in front of him, you will never find out what you're worth by asking what you have. You find it out on a cold morning when you hear somebody in trouble on the other side of a wall and you don't stop to count what it'll cost you. You just go.